Alright, here's our new stereo. This is just a Boss Bluetooth AM/FM receiver, Boss Elite. And we've got a stock stereo speakers and things like that. However, I did put right up here in the corner, these are 200 watt tweeters, which kind of help offset. There's tweeters in the A-pillar, this plastic A-pillar, but the hertz is not nearly as high, and these bring out the crisper highs. So what this video is on today, let me get my tripod set in here just right for you. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the stereo install. This is an 05 Chevy Tahoe, and it's got what's known as the high-end stereo system. So normal stereos, and I'll give you a quick rundown of these instructions. Basically, in the back of this car stereo, there's an ignition feed, a ground, and battery positive, and then this is the remote power for the amplifier, and then you basically got 8 channels of speaker, positive and negative. So it's actually only 4 channels, but it's 2 wires per channel. You've got a positive and a negative, and that's the way these are listed. Normally a stereo system in a vehicle is pretty straightforward. You take the old stereo out and you figure out what the speaker wires are, and you hook these wires up to the factory speaker wiring, and you're usually good to go, and you can do whatever you need to. Now on this one, we ran into a bit of a problem. I'll tell you kind of where we had to go with this. And if you've ever heard of the term, you can't get to there from here, this stereo is the exact definition of that. So basically what I've got here is a whole bunch of, and I'm not going to be able to see a lot of that, but it's basically functions for the, well, you still can't see very good, can you? Let me turn the camera back around a little bit. Got some light in here. Okay, so I can also turn this additional light on. That might help things. Alright, so basically in this system, they don't really give you a whole lot to go on, but I'm going to give you this is basically how most car stereos work right here. This is a car radio, and basically there's power and grounds going to the radio itself, and then output is your speakers. And you'll see like your left speaker, there's a door speaker, this is a pillar speaker, which is the one that I showed you that was right up here in the A-pillar. And then there's going to be door speakers in the rear, and there's this is the D-pillar speaker, which is in the very back. It's basically a Tahoe, like a Suburban. And so basically when you are doing a car stereo, you take the radio wiring and you snip it off, or you use an adapter, whatever it may be. In this particular one, the vehicle came with a radio stuffed in to the dash, but there was no wiring hooked up to it. So that's normally the way that you install one of these. However, this stereo is a bit more complicated than that. So the radio itself, it's got some cellular telephone voice signals, and it's got low reference, and it's also hooked to the vehicle communication interface module. So what is happening is the whole terminology of "you can't get there from here" is the way this vehicle worked out. And I'll give you some rundown of how this worked. Basically, there's just a big nest of wires where that stereo is now. There's just a big nest of wires in there, and I had to figure out what they did. Well, normally you would take two colored wires the same, and you would take a speaker outlet, and you would put the wires, make sure the stereo is turned on and it's tuned into a station, and it would turn some speakers on, and you could trace out the speaker wiring. Well, this one wouldn't do that. None of the wires worked for anything. As a matter of fact, where this stereo is hooked up, it only has battery power. It didn't actually have a ignition on to the stereo. I didn't really understand that entirely, but that's the way it worked out. So what I have here is an audio amplifier. Now this is the wiring for the audio amplifier, and it's showing basically your two left front, two right front, and you've basically got two subwoofers, and you've got 4 rear speakers right here. So this stereo system, which is it's a Bose, B-O-S-E, Bose driven system, is very complicated. And it's got an audio amplifier that is underneath the console, and in order to get the aftermarket stereo to talk to the factory audio amplifier, you have to wire it in correctly. There isn't anything in any of my All Data or my Mitchell stuff that shows how this has to be wired. You have to kind of look at how everything plugs in. And the way we do this, alright, so you've got 2 connectors in the back of the radio, and yeah, these are the ones. Now there's different options. There's a UQ7 and a Y91, and then there's a UQ7 with a Y91 option, and I can't remember exactly what they said the Y91 was. I'm sure somebody will chime in, but anyway, what I wanted to do is get the basic gist of the speaker system wired in, but I couldn't get it to play. I couldn't get the amp to come on. Well, then I found this is called the radio on signal, and basically you have to put 12 volts to that audio amplifier, and what that does is this turns the amplifier on. Keep in mind that the amplifier already has power to it. It's got power and ground and everything like that, but when the radio is turned on, this radio on signal is a 12 volt source right here, and that was not functioning. So I was able to take a digital voltometer and hook from the down below here in the console, the pink wire as it says, up to, there was a pink wire where this radio was installed, and sure enough that's the wire that I needed to turn power on. So I was able to use, if we look back in here for the stereo wiring, there was remote right there, and what that basically does is turn on an amplifier or something like that. Well, I used it to power up the amp in here, which is factory, and most everything was pretty straightforward. There is audio negative, there's audio positive signals, low level signals, and most of these wires, there was only 8 wires in addition, and so they all worked in conjunction with this system. This is the other plug-in that was in this, and there's the funny thing. You've got 2 connectors, they look identical. One of them is radio C1 and the other is radio up here. These are both radio C1s, however one's a part 1, one's a part 2. And so the connector is C1, and it was kind of hard to figure out exactly how that was going, but I figured it out, because most connectors are like C101 or C251 or whatever it may be. So you've got left rear speakers and right front speakers in this one connector here, which you can see the pins. There's only a few pins here, B6 through B12, where this one here has got A1 all the way through B5. So your B5 is a continuation here of B6. So basically that's the way this works, and you can tell this is a complicated stereo that was in it. The stereo that was in this when I got it was it was an aftermarket, and it was burned up. So I would imagine they were trying to make this thing work, and they probably put power where they shouldn't have. Probably put it through a speaker channel and it burned it up. So anyway, so you've got class 2 serial data, which is actually the serial data coming from the connector down here that gets you to tie into all the network multiplexing. That would actually be able to talk to the audio system as well, because there is a PID for audio on my scan tool. There's rear seat audio enable signal. That was with the Y91 without the Y91. I did not see that one. It should have been a purple wire, but it didn't have anything there. So the audio enable, which a lot of times is the it's for the headphone plug-in, and that sits back there by the passengers. Most everything else was pretty well spot on. There's an antenna enable signal, which this one doesn't need it. Antenna straightforward. There are some that have electric antenna that come up. And then there's also instrument panel dimming control, which this one didn't need that. There was another one that I was going to tell you too. Oh, radio mute, which that when I left open, I just taped it up, and it basically, if you ground that, it basically shuts off all the stuff out of the amplifier, so it mutes it, and then the rest of it is all speakers. And then, like I say, this is the audio amplifier. There's 2 connectors on the audio amplifier, which I can find. So one of these is with one option, and one of them is without. Because you've got, with RPO code, UQ7 without the Y91. That was with the Y91, and that was without the Y91. So there's 2 in here that go with this, with 91. Alright, and since I didn't think there was with 91, these are the connectors at the subwoofer, or the amplifier, not the subwoofer, sorry. So you've got speaker outputs, and then your battery voltage, of course. You've got a drain wire, which this one is just a bare wire, and that just basically it's basically like an earth ground. And then there's an actual ground wire. And then your radio signal on. This is that pink wire we talked about. It has to have power when the radio is turned on. Let's see, and then that radio mute. All the rest of them are all speaker. They all look like they're different wires and different connectors, but I was able to patch into these signals here, and it all worked fine. I think if this stereo, this little Boss stereo, I think if this thing had you know, several more outputs, you could probably fire these outputs on the subwoofers. But everything seemed to work okay. So it's working good and everything like that, but I just wanted to give you this example of how this works with this particular type of system, where you've got, this is a GM, and it's got, it doesn't have Wi-Fi or anything like that, but it does have the stereo wired into the multiplexing, and so it's pretty complicated to try and get everything working correctly. So I was able to get the Bluetooth and all the other stuff working. So anyway, another thumbs up, and I think we're good to go on this one. Thank you much.